Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break. I look at speedrunning, game development, content creation, and everything in between. Thanks so much for being here. So excited, have a lot to chat about. I don't even know where really to start with this, but please welcome to the podcast, Robert Dale Smith. Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Thanks for having me on. I first saw your videos as you did a review of USB to PCE, and so when you hit me up, I was like, sure, man.
This is cool. So cool. Thank you so much. I'm really want to kind of like dig into like how the heck you even thought of the adapters that you create and then the development process of it. Because for me, it's what we've been seeing in the retro community for, I don't know, it seems like going on now 10 years, but probably longer than that though, with so many different developments going on different hardware and software and all this kind of stuff. So I'm curious how you even got to what we see here, which is this little device we'll talk about in just a second. Before we get started, first, how did you get into video games? Like, what was kind of are you a kid of the 80s? Like, what was the things that got you started in video games?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the mid 80s, pretty much when the NES first came out. But I didn't start playing video games till I was about 5 years old. And I've been hooked pretty much since then. And as I got older, I kind of fell out of the hobby for a while after started going to college and started my career. And it was a couple years ago, I kind of wanted to get back to some of my old projects. I built a Dreamcast VMU icon website like back in 2001. So I was just like going through all the archives, trying to bring things back. And I just started stumbling on some of the newer stuff that was happening in the community as far as like the ODEs, and it kind of sucked me in. I started with the Dreamcast, and then now I think I've pretty much reclaimed all the consoles I had growing up that I slowly pawned off to get more games.
Do you have any of your childhood consoles? Because that seems like the things that happens. But I only have one of mine, which is the Game Boy. So
yeah, I have a few. When the Dreamcast came out in Japan, I sold everything I had. I had like the NES, everything boxed still. I guess at the time I just didn't know what I had, and I wanted that Dreamcast. And looking back, I'm like, oh man, I could have just waited another year, instead of selling everything I had. Ever since then, I've like tried to keep everything I've had since then, and just building it back up over the years.
I feel that exact same way about GameCube and PlayStation 2 because I was in college at the time. I had no money, so the only way I could afford something else was if I sold my previous console. And my GameCube, when prices skyrocketed on the GameCube, I'm like, maybe I should have kept that. That might have been nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's so cool. Did you have any preference? Were you like an RPG person or platforming games, or just like playing them all? What was kind of like your niche on gaming, if you had one?
Yeah, I mean, I just played pretty much everything. I guess not as big on sports games. Maybe like NFL Blitz and stuff like that, NBA Jam. But pretty much everything. I love RPGs and just platformers and just anything I can get my hand on. Lately though, I've been hooked to Rocket League. It's just I think for like 5 years now, it's just consistent. I keep going back to it.
It's a game that keeps on kicking. I shouldn't say I'm shocked, but because it's such a fun game, but it really has some legs and still has a very vibrant community still supporting, which is pretty interesting. It's just like I don't think that game's going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I was playing the other day. I was like, man, I started playing this in like 2015 just so I could hang out with some people at work, and then I'm the only one still playing it.
Well, there you go.
It's been a long time since then.
You mentioned making a website in 2001. Was that like something like on GeoCities, or were you doing your own type of development? How'd you get a site up and going in 2001?
I started building websites, I think around 97 or so. I got on AOL when I was like 13 years old and got in the chat rooms and met some people who were also building like video game fan websites. And they kind of, I begged them over and over until I finally figured out how to do basic HTML myself, and kind of ran with that for years. And I was doing web development before I kind of spent about a decade doing IT support. So eventually I went back to the development world, but I kind of wish I had stayed, doing web development that whole time.
No kidding, right?
But that's kind of where it began, though, was with that Dreamcast website. It was just something I wanted to get out there, and I figured out some way to make custom VMU icons. So I was just some kid in high school. I'm like, hey, send me an email and I'll make you a custom icon. And a couple years ago, I got the website back up, so it's still going. If you have a Dreamcast and have all the stuff set up to get on the internet, you could download custom icons, and I think the guide on there will still work if you wanted to make some more.
I have a Genesis, but I never went on to 32X to Saturn or Dreamcast. What exactly? My apologies, but what is a VMU? Are those the icons that that Dreamcast uses, or what is that?
Yeah, the VMU is I guess it's for a visual memory unit. It's basically the memory card.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the little screen that's in the controller.
Yeah.
And whenever you go into the UI, there's a little icon that appears, and there's like a subset that comes with it you could pick. But I'd found when it was I think it was Capcom's Power Stone. When you played it, it would just randomly put an icon on your VMU. So that kind of sparked my investigation, and then I found there was some like obscure set of tools on forums on how to put it together, and a lot of tedious work to edit the bitmaps and then convert all the files. But I thought about now it's been over 20 years going back and maybe making like a modern web application and make it real easy to just maybe draw a little 16 by 16 bit icon in the browser and then have a link to download it on your Dreamcast. But I was like, I don't know if that's worth my time. It's a pretty cool idea to bring it all back.
Oh, totally. This is fascinating. I've got a couple of questions about this. So, okay, first of all, you mentioned so the bitmap size on the Dreamcast is 16 by 16 for that piece of graphics.
Yeah, for those. And I think it was like you could have up to 256 colors or something like that. It was a very limited subset. So each time I had to go in and like he would ask for icons, and then half the battle was just trying to figure out which colors I would allow into the palette.
And then how would you actually get it on the, did you have to plug a console into your, like, was there some sort of interface that got you, or or a memory card? How would you get that thing actually on the console?
Yeah, the Dreamcast had a web browser. So you could go to the dial up and go to the website and tediously browse through. And if you click the specific VMU file on the Dreamcast, it would detect it as an icon and automatically install it.
Now,
I figured that out and ran with it.
Now, is the Dreamcast, I mean, does the browser still work? Can you browse the modern web on a Dreamcast browser?
Yeah, there's some new modern tools called the Dream Pi. You can get like a Raspberry Pi with a specialized software. Yeah. And then it basically emulates a dial-up connection. So then you can connect to some websites, and it's set up so that it'll redirect you to some specific Dreamcast sites. Cause like the modern web is pretty hard to browse on. I think it's like 640 by 480, the Dreamcast output. So there's only certain websites you can go to, but there's stuff you can still do, like download saves and the icons. And there's even a community of people who play online still. So that's a thing too.
Oh, that is so cool. Now, I'm sorry, I'm so fascinated by this. Was there, were you able to get you mentioned dial-up, but is there an Ethernet adapter for the Dreamcast, or was there one when it first came out or anything like that?
Yeah, there was an Ethernet adapter. I think it briefly came out in the US, but it's pretty hard to find, and not all the games even support it. So even to this day, if you're going to do like the setup, you still want to emulate the dial-up connection, because that's what's going to be compatible with everything.
Okay, totally. That makes sense.
That's another wild idea. It'd be cool if someone shoved like a Pico Pi into Dreamcast modem and got it on Wi-Fi or something. There's just so many projects out there.
The Wii, is the one I'm familiar with, because by the way, it's almost trivial nowadays thanks to the community to put on homebrew or something like that on your Wii. So was this one of like your first tinkering projects for a retro? Because this is fascinating. Like I'm trying to figure out like how you ended up getting into all this development stuff. So it seems like this might have been one of the first projects you did.
Yeah, I guess for retro gaming, I mean, in the back of the day, we were in some friends on chat rooms. We were building like Final Fantasy VII websites, and then when Final Fantasy VIII came out, like it was the thing to make a fan site for, and at least the guys I was hanging out with. And I kind of faded out of the web development for many years before I kind of went back to build myself a website for my computer repair business I was doing. So that's kind of where I got back into development. But yeah, retro, I would say that's my start in the retro community now, because I guess it's a little bit more recently with Twitter. I've kind of connected with a lot of the scene that's here. So I don't know if anyone remembers me from back then.
Well, I mean, and how much communities change, and things change and people come and go and type of thing, which totally, that's just like life in general.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is so cool. So then let's first, I guess, a little bit talk about, what was one of your first commercial products, or like when did controlleradapter.com come around? I guess before you answer that question, let me explain here a little bit on how I even got to this point. This little device here is it makes any USB controller make it playable with the PC Engine or the TurboGrafx 16, depending on your consoles. Was this your first product, or was there something that came before this? I guess, how did we get to this point here? Which this thing is awesome, by the way. But how did we get to this point here?
Yeah, it was, I mean, like I said, I started kind of doing some of the modding stuff and just following all the people in the retro community. And it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I started working on an adapter to convert Super Nintendo to 3DO. And that was just kind of, I had just got a 3DO and I got a used one. I didn't have a controller with it. So I was just kind of looking for options. I was like, maybe I'll find something. And I had found some like code from 11 years ago on a Atari Age forum post. And I was like, I desperately reached out to the guy, and eventually he responded to me and he posted the full source he had. And it was enough to get started and kind of like allow me to teach myself kind of just the basics of how the Super Nintendo controller works and then how the 3DO controller works. And just through the process of working on that, I was posting it on Twitter, and some people in the 3DO community kind of noticed, and I joined their Discord. And I think from there, it kind of took off with a lot of people kind of recognizing the project I was working on. And I realized it wasn't just something that I wanted, that other people wanted as well. So it was really that project that kind of introduced me to everything from like programming these microcontrollers, but also designing the PCB, doing 3D printing for the shell, and then setting up the website. I've done that before. So it's kind of another thing I'd wanted to do was create a Shopify store. So it was like kind of the perfect combination of things came around. I was like, I'm going to turn this into a real product and get it out there. And since then, I've been like beating myself like in my garage, like slaving away trying to build them fast enough. But as each product I work on, I kind of get better at designing it in a way that it's easier for me to manufacture. And I kind of built a few other things. Like I made a 3DO in-game reset mod. So a little board you could put in there so you can hit a certain key combination and just reset the game or get back to the ODE menu. And then just a few other things. Like I made a CDI splitter. These were like really simple projects that didn't really take any code. But it was on Twitter one day. I saw someone talking about how the 8-bit DOE PC Engine controller didn't have any way to connect to an actual PC engine. And just as a joke, I was like, I could do that, you know. And a couple of people, started posting on there, and I was like, I felt like there was a real need. So that's really how that got started. It was really just a tweet, and I was almost like a challenge. I was like, I think I could do it. And I think it was like about a week or so after that, I took some like just microcontrollers I had laying around. I had a really basic prototype working, and Retro RGB picked it up, and I got a lot of hits on my site, and people signed up. So I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to focus on. So that's actually for this past year been the main thing that I've been working on, and that's one reason I got a lot of updates coming out for it recently, just to keep kind of pushing along and making it even better.
Okay, so many questions. Thank you. This is so cool.
Yeah.
So let's first start with then the SNES to 3DO. And I'm so glad SNES might be my favorite, kind of non-joystick based controller. And so can totally understand fitting your own needs. I'd assume you'd had a similar experience with the SNES controller. How do I make this thing work with the 3DO? Can you tell us, and if you can't, by the way, I totally understand, but can you tell us a little bit about like what makes the adapter work? Is there, I've got an input device that captures my inputs, and it's got a little Arduino, in there. Is it something similar to that kind of setup, or just your custom board? Like how does the smarts of this thing actually work?
Yeah, basically it's the same thing as an Arduino. It's the same basically the same processor chip that's on it. There's some different variations. The one I have is just a really simple 8-bit microcontroller, and it's a pretty old one because the forum post that I found this original schematic, he built this so long ago. And so, and like in hindsight, looking back, I kind of abused myself going through this whole process because one, the schematic and the chip was old, but also the programming language he wrote it in was assembly language, which is like really, really low level code. I barely had worked with it before. But what's really cool is that with the microcontroller, you can actually like listen to the signals coming from the controller line, whether it goes high or low. Oh. And then it's just really a matter of kind of listening for the right sequence of events and then firing back what it expects. So I just kind of was like watching this guy on the forum, and I saw like in the screenshots he had an oscilloscope, and I got an oscilloscope and hooked it up, and I was like, you can actually see like when you press the button that the voltage goes up at a certain spot in the line. So that's kind of where I kind of just slowly kept tinkering with it until I got it to working pretty dang well. It should work almost identical as far as the console is concerned to original controller. But it was from that I learned a lot about converting these things around, and I kind of, especially with the newer product, like the USB to PC Engine one, I've moved towards using more modern microcontrollers and being able to use newer stuff. It's made life a lot easier. So like the USB stuff, I probably would have never got that released if I tried doing it the way I'd done on the last project, just because there's so many things already written out there that you can reuse.
Totally.
As far as code.
How long does the 3DO, the SNES to 3DO convert quick adapter take to develop? Actually, when was the first one, or when a customer actually finally had one?
I think I worked on it for a good 6 months or more. Like after I started telling people about it and got it to the point where I shipped the first ones. Because it was a long process. I just had this vision, and I was like, all right, well, now I got to learn how to make a circuit board. And then I was like, well, now I got to figure out how to 3D print. And I picked up a cheap printer, and that was a own headache in itself. Just starting with just a basic printer, I didn't know what I was going to get myself into. But I think it's all these trials and kind of tribulations you go through that kind of help you figure out the right way to do things, and kind of got me to where I am to have the USB to PC Engine adapter.
I would say that's probably, I don't know if I say my dream console, but it's one that I would still, for some reason I have an affinity for full motion video games, and the 3DO definitely had a fair amount of those. So I've only been able to play through emulation, but I'm always curious, I'll go to my local retro store and I'll see you, and I'm like, oh, maybe one day I'll draw. That's like one of the dream consoles. I think it'd be fun to have. Do you still get a chance to play it all today with all the work that you do?
I haven't. The 3DO hasn't got not enough attention lately since I've been doing the PC Engine stuff. But that's kind of the best part. Was once I get the adapter working, I spend a lot of time actually using it and testing it. So I use that as my excuse. I'm testing. I need to play all these games. But yeah, the 3DO just doesn't get enough credit. I just think the time period it came out. If you look at it in context, at that time period, if you played it, it was pretty cool. And I totally missed out at that time. So I think that's another part of my nostalgia. I just read about it in magazines. So as an adult, I'm like imagining, what it would have been like.
You would see it at Toys R Us or whatever, and it had that huge price tag on it. So it was just one of those things that never seemed attainable or anything.
Yeah. I was like, it must be good.
In retrospect too, it did a lot of things that are kind of unheard of nowadays by different companies producing them and everything like that. So it's pretty, I don't know if it was ahead of its time, or just maybe, didn't find. I feel like that there's a lot of things about retro gaming can be said about that. So kind of an interesting place in history the 3DO has.
Definitely.
So you mentioned it, the 8-bit do controller. I was actually using this last night to, I'm a speedrunner, so I was de-rusting a game that I'm going to be playing a tournament in next week. And I got to tell you, there's so many different things that have impressed me about this. And I mentioned this in the review. I'm going to link to the review in the description. But I mean, you can just plug in the receiver and the thing works just perfectly. The thing that has really surprised me the most about this adapter here is the lack of lag. And as somebody who, that's really important to gameplay for most speedrunners, is the lag in controllers, almost imperceptible. And I don't just say that lightly. So I guess how was the process different? You said you got the chance to use modern tools. How does that change the development process for something like this versus the other adapter you'd worked on?
Yeah, with this one, I use in basically the same thing that's in the Pico Pies that everyone's using for these other mods. I'm using a slightly different development board, but it's kind of the same chip that's in there. And it's really cool is it's got these things called PIOs, and it's basically allows you to communicate very quickly through what's called a state machine. So I'd spent a lot of time making sure that within this really simple programming language they have on there for setting up these PIOs, that I could simulate not only just a controller, but the multi-tap and being able to simulate multiple controllers at once. It took quite a bit of time to get that working just right, but it pretty much responds in real time to whenever the console requests the signal. So I think that's how I've been able to get it to a point where it's just imperceptible, the lag. I'm not gonna say no lag because I haven't done any real true lag tests to claim that. I feel like that's the next thing I should work on, is just a really good lag testing tool for controllers in general. But I think that's the same thing with the 3DO adapter. Since I wrote it in such a low level language, I was able to respond to the signals that's coming from the console instantly, basically within the almost a single clock cycle. So in the way that almost all these controllers work on these older consoles is the console just sends a signal and it says, hey, I'm waiting for those buttons. And then it just responds with a series of up and downs on the line of whether the button's pressed or not.
Once again,
So
I haven't done it. I don't have equipment like yourself to actually measure what the actual lag is. We have some tools in some of our where we can. So especially for TurboGrafx 16 speedrunners, turbo has become a thing. So on our leaderboards, we allow turbo, and that's not in the speedrunning community. Sometimes that can be a bit controversial because some of the consoles weren't developed with that in mind. And when I've used an OEM controller, I plug the 8-bit do controller right in the wireless one, and I can't notice really any lag at all. But using the Pro 2 controller, and I've used this on other my PC and some other consoles and stuff. I don't know if the controller reacts slower or whatnot itself, but I can notice something slightly different with that. And I know that's not the adapter. I know the adapter works fine because I'm noticing a slightly different delay between that controller and this one. It was just a real interesting process, I guess, to get there with that. Thankfully, you've been posting a lot of, in fact, many of your updates on Twitter, and it almost seems like there's this platform that you're developing. And is that true? And can you tell us a little bit about the software side of things versus the hardware? Like, what's that process like to get that thing up and running?
Yeah, and that's totally. I actually built an adapter using kind of the same USB stack for reading the USB controllers for the new one. I basically took everything I made for the PC Engine and ported it over. And that one's kind of been on the back burner for a little bit. And just because I just haven't had as much demand, and I've just been constantly building these USB to PC Engine adapters. So I was like, I double thought about it, and I was like, I'm just going to double down on the USB to PC Engine adapter and really kind of build out that platform for reading the USB controllers. Because I think that's kind of the unique part that I built there that I think that I could port over to a lot of other consoles. So I'm really just looking at consoles that are in need of controllers like the 3DO, and the new one has really expensive controllers as well. So it's like anything in those areas, I think there's just a lot of need for building another solution. And this USB stack has kind of evolved into its own thing that I've been developing, because first it was just the 8-bit do controller, and then I added PS4 and then PS5, and then at this point I think I support every controller mode that the 8-bit do controllers can be in. So just like recently I added Switch, and kind of generic USB controllers are able to work now. So it's like I've got something that I think is just beyond what just the PC Engine needs, and a lot of other consoles could use it as well.
I saw your development on the Switch controllers, and I have a Switch Pro controller, and I have wanted to try it out because I really like the controller a lot. I don't know if it must be for me personally, casual gaming, speed running, the controller plays a big part in the experience of playing the game. So the fact that I can bring my own controller and find one that I like, I really like the Switch Pro controller. So being able to try that out, I actually have to test that out. I haven't tried it yet. So, yeah. So my next question then is you can port this stuff over. This is so fascinating. Would you mind, what language have you been developing this stack in? Like what is the actual like logistics of this look like?
Yeah, and since I'm building everything on the Pico platform, there's a library called Tiny USB, and a lot of these projects use it for either simulating to pretend to be a USB device, or for reading USB devices. So that's kind of where my code side started, was just they have an example for reading a PS4 controller. I started with that, and I've just kind of been building on, adding more and more controllers, and started kind of seeing a pattern. And then more recently, I started talking to ChatGPT about maybe there's some way that I can read controllers in generally, because up to this point, I've been implementing controllers one by one. I like physically get the controller and plug it in my computer and have it spit out some logs for what I'm seeing come from it, and then just kind of interpret, okay, I press A, now I know the first bit went up. That must be A button. So it's a real tedious process to add these controllers. And recently I kind of found a way that you can actually read the controller on these generic ones, and it'll give you a description of all the bits and which one's the first button and which one's up and down and so on. So I added a whole bunch of controllers I can't wait to see other people try out, but I don't know if it's like kind of a futile endeavor, because like you said, the controller is really important. I think most of the people wanted my adapter to use the 8-bit do PC Engine controller, but I think it's a part of my larger plan to kind of support all possible USB controllers and be able to bring it to other consoles. Because I guess that's kind of my vision is bring everything to USB and back. So I'd like to take every USB controller and make it work on every console, but also I'm working on some USB adapters to convert the existing controllers to USB. So theoretically, you could get to a point where you could use any controller on any system if I get to where I want to go.
You mentioned, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So are you are you at least assembling all of these individually yourself? Is that how this works?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Wow.
lot of work.
Holy cow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The
Do you ever
3DO
sleep?
adapters, it was taking me about an hour to build each one with the cable and everything and just
Wow.
soldering and programming and testing. It's just a long process. I feel bad for like, I only got so many of those out and I kind of moved on just because it's a real big time sink. With
Totally.
the PC Engine adapter, I adopted just making kind of a basic board that I can attach existing dev boards to, so that makes it a lot easier, a lot less components that I have to solder. But moving forward, I'm still learning more about designing an entire like board just for myself, so that I can have the 100% of it manufactured. But there's still that step where I got to put it together, put it in the plastic shell, and
Print the
it
shell.
doesn't
I mean,
sound
the
like
whole
much, but
thing.
yeah, it doesn't sound like much, but once you're doing like hundreds of these, and doing it every day, it really adds up, and the shipping and it's one thing to make the product, but to try to get a bunch of these out, I really kind of have sympathy for a lot of these creators I've seen over the years that people are kind of giving them shit just because they can't get it out fast enough, and then they end up getting cloned, and it's just you've seen it.
You mentioned it, so I want to throw this out there that Bob from Retro RGB was on the web on the podcast, and he talks about this, that it's these are almost all of our projects. It's a 1, 2. They're very small. If you have a team, you're lucky, but very small projects. And I mentioned this in my video, but like there's only so many of us PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 folks who, this is a very small niche thing, but even that, because even if we're a small community, it's still just you out there busting your ass trying to get this. So it's like, first of all, I'm super thankful, but then secondly, that's why I think it's fair, some of the costs that are associated with this, like you're making a very, I wouldn't even dream of something like this existing even just like 5 years ago. So super thankful for your time and for having your energy to do some of this. Also, the fact that you want to continue on and create a platform out of this. I mean, I love big plans and big goals. At the same time, I know it's just you right now back there, doing all this stuff. I think it was you, but I had a little quick customer service question, and your website was very responsive to answer, and it was kind of cool being actually able to talk to somebody who is the person who could change this thing and make it work. I assume that's part of it too. You got to answer customer service requests and things like that as part of this whole project as well.
Yeah, and on my website, I have like a little chat at the bottom, so it's almost like text messaging. You can hit me up anytime, any hour. I get messages, so I try to like answer, as promptly as I can, and I think most people are pretty nice, and usually it's pretty basic questions. People just want to know stuff about it, and I think it makes a lot of difference if there's like a real human you can talk to. So I think a lot of the ideas I've got as well for like features and things that I want to build have come from just talking to a lot of people in the communities when they've just reached out on my website.
It's pretty amazing. I had a similar experience with the folks. I don't know if you've ever heard of HD Retrovision, but they make these RGB cables, and it's just those two guys, we're doing similar things that you are. And I think it sounds like you're a retro gamer. There's a reason you made these products. It was obvious you had a 3DO, you wanted to make it yourself. So pretty cool that you still, even after all of this time and effort, you're still pretty psyched about it. I'm the firmware. I really, you've been still continuing to upgrade and continuing on with the firmware. Are there any things that you think might be able to features that you can add? Because this thing still feels so feature rich as it is. I mean, you can change from 2-button mode to 2-button mode to 6-button mode. Are there any additional features that you could think of that you would want for something like this, or have any plans for?
Yeah, for the PC Engine adapter, I mean, other than more controller support, I'm kind of running out of ideas. There were some other like really obscure PC Engine controllers that I could possibly emulate. I think it's called Pachinko controller. And it's for like this like slot machine type game.
Yeah.
And all it has is like an analog. I don't know if it's worth simulating, but it'd probably take me a week to figure out, and then one person would use it, kind of thing. But yeah, anytime people reach out, so like you said 3-button. There actually is a 3-button mode now to simulate the Avenue. Yeah, there's a 3-button controller.
The Avenue.
Out
that's
there,
right. The Avenue. That's right. Yes, that's right.
So someone reached out and they're like, "Hey, you should do this." And then we kind of went back and forth, and I think we got a pretty good solution. And if you're using the M30 8-bit do controller with the 6 buttons, it actually maps out to the same layout. to the Avenue 3 or the 6 if you switch it to the 6-button mode. But yeah, it's like other than controller support, I'm always looking for other stuff. If anyone who's even more diehard PC Engine fan and knows something that's missing, please let me know.
You just reminded me of something I wanted to ask about. I'm glad I didn't forget this. So first of all, 6-button mode, it's like the only way to play Street Fighter 2. Just to throw it for those who have that game, it's the best way and the only way to play it. Because we're speedrunners, like the turbo settings and what frames, what's the actual simulating the turbo presses, is that something you've had to program into the adapter itself, or is that something that you continue to let the controller happen on their side? Like, how does the turbo part actually translate?
Yeah, well, just recently, I added support for software, basically simulated turbo in my adapter for controllers that don't have it built in. But so if the controller does have it built in, you probably would just use that. But if it doesn't, then I have it just automatically kind of use that same layout that the PC Engine controller has. So the 2 buttons above 1 and 2 will be the turbo. And then I have it set up so you can press L and R and it'll switch between 2 different speeds. I probably need to revisit that and get some more like accurate measurements so that I can try to get the speeds exactly to a real controller. But right now it's just kind of a rough estimate, just kind of what I saw on the screen flickering. So it's not real scientific on that one, but no one's complained, so it's working.
That's one of the few things we actually did test, and we have a little speedrunning Discord, and I think it was 2 frames on, 2 frames off is the max, I think max turbo or something like that. But I don't know how that would translate to what you might have to do on your side of things. We know frames, but that's about it. So
yeah, I think right now I just kind of have it set up based on the clock cycles that the actual adapter's running at. So I think it would probably be better if I just based it on the frames and then kind of measure out how many I've skipped and so on. That might be a better implementation, but there's always time for more updates.
I saw you tweet about this, and I have a very similar experience that, if you're on the adapter itself, it's got a PC Engine connection. So if you want to plug it into TurboGrafx 16, you need an adapter. I don't remember how long ago, but I purchased one of the, oh my gosh, what's the name of the company that does the controllers? Oh my gosh, there's a company that creates TurboGrafx 16 controllers.
Hyperkin.
There you go, Hyperkin. Thank you. Oh my gosh, totally wrong. And the controller itself is whatever, but the adapter works great on like everything. So, but then I also noticed that are you making your own adapter then, or like how are you putting together? I noticed they're on their website. So how does that work?
Yeah, I'd found a manufacturer who makes the similar cable, and I was like, "Can you make me one?" That basically with these 2 ends, and they're like, "No problem." So the Hyperkin has a pretty good one if you want to convert, PC Engine to TurboGrafx, or
other way around.
The other way
16,
around.
the
other
PC
way
Engine.
around.
Yeah.
And then I made the adapter that goes the other way, so you can go PC Engine to TurboGrafx. Yeah. So I mainly made that as kind of an add-on for people who want to use my adapter, and because its default output is for the PC Engine, but it's the wiring. It's exactly the same wire, just a different connector.
It totally makes sense. I had a couple of questions. So just to, I guess, the other products that you make available or that you continue to work on. You mentioned earlier the new one. What exactly is the new one? I'm not quite sure what that is, if you don't mind me asking.
I think that's the best part of it, is it's so obscure that no one even knows what it is. I found out about it just a couple of years ago, and I don't know, it just keep popping up on my timeline, and it just was a curiosity. And then doing all these controllers, several people have reached out and they're like, you should do a Nuon adapter. So eventually I picked up a Nuon about a year and a half ago. And basically what they are is it's a gaming platform that would be built into DVD players. So around the early 2000s, these came out, and there was Samsung and a couple other models that were going to include this platform. And I just think it was right before the PS2 came out, or maybe around that same time. But it sounded like Sony had the better idea of building a game console that could play DVD players instead of a DVD player that can play games. Because other than it only being out for a short time period, there was 5 games released. And, I think that really the only game you would get the console for it's called Tempest 3000. And it's a popular game that's, gone back to arcade, that it was on Atari Jaguar. And then this one version's only on the Nuon. So if you want the most exclusive game for one of the most obscure consoles, it's the one to get. but for me, it became like a personal challenge because once I got it, I realized that there's really no documentation at all on the internet, and what there is out there, I found it doesn't match up with what the controller's actually doing. So that's probably the most like intense project as far as figuring out, the one I'm the most proud of, is because I totally reverse engineered the nuance protocol. It's called polyface, and basically it's just sending these packets back and forth, and one by one, I slowly, interpreted what was going on. And pretty deep into the project, someone reached out to me who had some documentation from someone who kind of, they passed it over to me, and it kind of helped me kind of like color in all the lines I was missing and get everything wrapped up. But I think that's just another example of these consoles that the controllers are hundreds of dollars, and if someone could just figure out how to make an adapter, there's a lot of different options out there.
My mind's a little bit blown here because, first of all, I never realized that DVDs even had a gaming platform, as you mentioned. So this is wild to me. But Tempest is a game I remember seeing in the arcade as a kid, and then there was this 3000 is this remake of it for the platform. Wow, I can't imagine this game is cheap for such a niche. Finding this game must not be. Do you have the game by any chance?
I do. I happen to get like a bundle of games, so I bought the console with some games. Otherwise, like that whole bundle, the game would be more than just the bundle I got. So I think I've seen them for over $500 or more. So, dude, which is most of the new on games. I think it's just become a weird collector item just because there's not many of them out there. And I think with the controller, I'd heard some people saying that years ago, someone tried to make an adapter and they bought up a lot of the controllers to pull the chips out of.
Oh, no.
And maybe that's one reason the controllers are more obscure, but I think just no one knew about these things.
Jeez. Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Well,
I'm sure most of the people who had it didn't know it was a game system. So it was just a DVD player as far as they were concerned.
Right. I mean, because it still played movies, right? It was still a video player or whatever. Okay, so that part's not lost. Yeah, I that was one of the. I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, for that case, the fact that it did the movie, the DVDs and the Blu-rays, huge. That's one of the reasons I had one. I'm like, this is amazing. I could play the movies and play games at the same time. This is cool.
Yeah, and I remember at the time, the DVD players were more expensive, I think, than the PS2, or pretty close to the price. So it was just like a no-brainer.
Like, geez.
So Sony killed it on that one.
Well, she's Louise. What a cool, once again, another awesome niche project that, like, there's going to be, however many small group of people, but like myself, are going to be super thankful that something like this exists.
I think it was Bob made a joke. It's like all 12 people will be excited.
Yeah, for real, right? Like, that's the way I feel about a lot of times about TurboGrafx 16 speedrunning, because TurboGrafx 16 thankfully has a little bit of a community, but then speedrunners were even just a smaller community of that. So it's a whole thing anyway. So it looks like you also have an adapter for CDI and a SNES adapter too. Are these two things that you're actively working on, or are they still are you able to purchase these if you're into these? And what exactly are these adapters?
Yeah, I have. I've started work on basically the same thing that I've done with the Nuon, and then I'm kind of planning to do with other consoles to port this USB stack that I've built over. So the CDI was one it's next on my list to do. So I've got a prototype together. I just haven't had priority to get enough of those out. I've got like a pre-order sign up on my website. So people want it, let me know. There was a lot less demand for the CDI, and mention Bob again. He kind of said it's probably just because there's existing solutions out there. So I think it would be cool because I also support mouse and keyboard, and a lot of the games are sort of like mouse input as far as the way the cursor input goes. So I think it'd be really cool to use a real PC mouse on it.
I've only, my CDI, once again, very limited. I don't even remember the controller. I remember it being a pretty limited controller, if that's the case. So when you're talking about something like, are there more multiple types of controllers for CDI? I'm not too familiar with the console itself.
Yeah, it's been a while since I was working on that, but it's basically just two buttons.
Right? Okay.
And if it does have the third button just simulates pressing both at the same time.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess it was like later on a desperate attempt to add 3 buttons to their system, but it's pretty basic. It's just a D-pad and 2 buttons essentially.
I played through some of the Zelda games and there have been some really awesome developments where they've ported them to PC, so you're able to kind of play them. You know, if you don't have Wand of Gamelon, I don't remember what the other one was called, but very fun. But I know the people I know who do have the CDI are definitely there's a speedrunning community around it. So like I'm sure that group of folks might be interested in something. But you're right, there is some existing stuff, so kind of interesting. And this is the SNES to USB. Is that one are you actively developing that one? Was that an older project?
Yeah, this is one that I've just kind of started as just kind of a fun project. I was experimenting with this new software called Flux. I think their website's flux.ai, and they have some PCB design CAD software that's all web based.
Oh, interesting.
And it's pretty cool because it's like Google Docs. You can just share a link to your PCB design, and it opens right up, and you can view it 3D, and multiple people can edit it. And I was just experimenting with that. So I kind of just took my understanding of the Super Nintendo controller, and I was like, I'm going to make my own Super Nintendo adapter because there's existing ones out there. And that just kind of evolved over time. After I made the circuit board for it, it attaches to like an Arduino or to Pico Pi. It'll attach to either one. And then I wrote some simple open source code for it. But while I was doing that, I stumbled on this project called GP 2040. Which is for building open source like fight sticks.
Oh yeah,
and it's got really good compatibility. So it works with Switch, PS3, and there's even a PS4 mode. So I got the open source firmware running on that. So I guess that's really the main difference between my Super Nintendo USB adapter than these other ones is just the broad compatibility that's got built in using this GP 2040 software.
Does that change your stack that you're working on? And the reason I ask is because way long ago, I bought a cheap Super Nintendo to USB adapter I got off Amazon, and it sucked ass. And one of the biggest things was the delay and the lag. Like it didn't feel like I was using like the Super Nintendo controller, there's no input lag, or at least none that I can perceive. I'm sure there is some, but
there should be.
But and so that would be something that I'd be super interested in, is buying those cheap. I don't remember exactly where I got it from, but so something that got rid of that would be or at least minimized it would be pretty cool. Does yours have any was it something similar to that?
Yeah, and on this one, this is kind of the flip side. So most of the projects that we talked about, I'm trying to convert USB to the console. And this one, I'm converting the controller to USB. So it's a different stack of software. And on this one, going from the controller to USB, I try to keep these projects open source so other people could build them and expand on them. And most recently, I put together a PlayStation 1, but I built it off of a guide that's already out there. I just wrote my own firmware. So I could use the Negcon controller to play some racing games on my PC. But I think over time I'll slowly come out with those. Are just kind of my fun projects to do the controller to USB, and it's nice that they work with my adapters as well. But it should be pretty low lag. You mentioned that was your concern there with the other adapter.
Only because I think I could. God, I'm sorry.
I think I could improve the latency even more, but using the the GP 2040 software, it's already got really low lag from the way this open communities develop their software.
So for any of your projects, if you don't mind me asking, there is really interesting community support out there. There's a lot of different places people can go to find people who are tinkering with things the way that you are. Where have some of the places or the spaces that you've found that have worked for you, or places you've been able to bounce ideas or questions off of? Because that part is also curious too. I know you mentioned just somebody, you felt like this one was a little bit, the PC Engine adapter was a bit of a challenge, so that's how you got you involved. Where are places that you've spent some time in, and places you might recommend if people are interested in this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's kind of where I got started discovering everyone and reading along and just seeing what other people are working on. And it wasn't until I actually was working on the 3D adapter that I first tried Discord. And I found that kind of the power of Discord is you finding these really niche communities and people who really care about this specific thing. So I didn't even know there was 3DO fans out there, let alone a community. So it was pretty cool to kind of join those guys. And there's a core group of people who are always there chatting, and some developers who've been working on 3DO stuff for years. So there's always some community somewhere where there's people who know way more about it than you do that are just always open to chat and bounce ideas. So even with the new one, there's even a community there for those guys. There's people actively trying to develop stuff for that. Yeah. There's actually more people in there than that.
Yeah, totally.
Surprisingly. Yeah.
That-
But yeah, recently they cracked the keys so that more homebrew stuff could come to the new one. So maybe we'll see some more ports coming, see what it was really capable of.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. How did they do? How did you mentioned breaking the keys? How does something like that even, are you able to like download the firmware somehow? Like, how do you get to a point like that?
Well, I hadn't even got. I actually want to write my own like Nuance software to test my adapter. Just something that pops up something on the screen. So it's something I still need to circle around. But basically, if you write some software, there's some steps that you can compile a disk and burn it, and then it'll actually boot up. And I'm not sure if they cracked the keys or they just found some way to simulate the keys, but they got around that security spot
cool.
there that was making it hard to run it on all the different Nuons. I think there was a few the Nuon models that didn't have the same level of security that could just run the software easily, but there's a lot more to come for such a niche little area.
No kidding. That actually brings up just one more question that sparked to mind because of that. Do other does the TurboGrafx or does the PC Engine have some sort of security for? Does that like exist for 8 and 16-bit consoles as well?
I don't believe so. I mean, I've just been working on the controller side, so
Yeah.
at least on that, there's none. At least modern consoles, I know the controllers, there are security keys. So it's a little bit harder to make open source controllers. Like this firmware I use, GP2040, they have a PS4 mode, but you have to rip your own keys from your own controller.
Oh, wow.
And it's such a complicated process. I was like, I'm not even going to try to do that. Otherwise, the controller will like time out after 8 minutes. It'll just stop responding. And you have to unplug and plug it back in. But so I guess these modern, Sony and Microsoft didn't want people just willy-nilly making controllers unless they're third party. But
yeah, unless they're
there's companies out there that make adapters. So I guess they just don't care about the security or circumventing it. So there's options.
Not surprising. There's a will, there's a way, I guess.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay, so I guess here's the.
But yeah, I'm not.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if there's any like specific security though on PC Engine as far as it seems like on these ODEs and to boot the games from SD cards pretty easy now. So if there was someone, they figured a way around it.
It is kind of cool, and I'm surprised at how open some of the developers have been on Twitter, because first of all, as like a fan and as a geek, it's really cool to see projects progress and everything. At the same time, I know it's not easy to put yourself out there sometimes because, especially if you have an idea, people in the community, we get excited about things, and then sometimes we're a little bit overly excited and where's our, all that kind of stuff. But so the fact that you put yourself out there, it's pretty cool. Where can people find this stuff if people are interested? I noticed you did this was a while ago now, but you have the PC Engine adapter is available. It was sold out for a little while. Where can people go to find if this is something they're interested in, they want to pick up?
Yeah, you can just go to my website at controlleradapter.com, and I have all my adapters on there. Follow me on Twitter. You can see all the links to the open source stuff that I've been posting. And it's all on my GitHub. If you dig around enough, you'll find a link to it.
And in case you're wondering, Robert Dale Smith's screen name is Robert Dale Smith. So there you go.
Yeah.
And you continue to
all the platforms.
I'm sorry, all the platforms as well?
All the platforms, same screen name. So wherever you want to find me. Mostly posted on Twitter, though.
It's cool, like the way that you share. And I don't know if you're still going to do this. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but you've been doing controller giveaways, which is like awesome as well. So people have another opportunity to just kind of interact and see the progress, but then, maybe win some. Are you still doing those by any chance?
Yeah. I mean, I started off just giving away controllers that I had that I'm not using. And I'm starting to run out of controllers. And then I had some open source controllers I was wanting to sell, but I found there was a non-commercial license on them. So I got the parts. I've been building those and giving them away. So I'm always looking for something else. And I think the cool part that I've seen is just kind of, it's become a way for people to discover controllers they've never seen before. So even if you don't win, I think a lot of people have fun just kind of checking it out. So I'd like to keep that going. It's been 6 months now, and I've given at least one controller away a week this year. So we'll see how much longer I can keep going.
I got to tell you, it's one of those things. I as a kid, I had TurboGrafx 16 mode. As an adult, when I had to repurchase consoles, it was PC Engine, a little more affordable and stuff. But there was we have there's detailed wikis on how there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of PC Engine controllers out there. And the ones I know you've been working with a lot of the USB type controllers that convert over to us. So I wanted to donate some controllers when we were talking. I was like, I'll send you my 8-bit to you if I'll get another one. But it sounds like you've purchased, at this point, you got to purchase dozens and dozens of these things to test them with your adapter and everything.
Yeah, that was another part of why I was like, I got to get rid of these controllers, because sometimes I just order it just so that I could plug it in once and figure out the driver and then move on. I'm like, it's a great controller, but I've got too many.
Right.
I'll never use it. So I was like, you could go to a better home. And I just thought it'd be a cool idea to do.
Well, so cool. I'm so glad that you continue to spend hours and hours. It doesn't sound like I don't know when you have time for sleep at this point, but with all the work you're doing. But I
just
really
had a daughter 6 months ago, so
oh no,
it makes it even more complicated. Yeah,
you're really not sleeping. You got a family, oh geez.
Yeah. Well, I just gave up on sleep.
Well, thank you then for continuing to do that, even considering all those things happening. I can't wait to see what you work with next. And I hope this gives people some understanding about why this process does take so long too. That was one thing that I definitely got from some of the other developers we've had on the podcast, because it is an all time consuming process. And a lot of times there's not many people doing this kind of work. So, the fact that you're doing this, like as you mentioned, in your own space and everything like that with your own printing, this whole process just is mind-boggling how long it takes. So,
yeah, believe me, looking back, I'm like, man, I can't believe I figured all this out, and it's a lot of stuff I've wanted to know how to do for years. So, it's been nice that there's something that I could focus my attention on long enough to get through all this and learn everything.
Dude, Robert, what a cool takeaway. Like this, you didn't even, you didn't even consider doing that you'd be able to do something like this. So hopefully that's a takeaway for people out there, that if you even just have an idea, what the hell, run with it. Give it a try. You never know what can happen and stuff. Did you solder
everything
before
you
you
need
got
on the
into
internet? I had done a little bit of soldering. I mean, I was in IT, and I'd done a lot of laptop repair and stuff. So that kind of was easily translated over.
Yeah, you never know. Just check the internet. You'd be surprised at what you can discover. So
totally.
Well, thanks again for the time. I really do appreciate it. Keep on. I can't wait to see what comes out next. And if you want a PC, USB to PC Engine adapter, it's available right now. You can still grab one off of the website. So go there now. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. If you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, sequencebreakpodcast.com. All the info is there for social media, email, all the back episodes, all that kind of fun stuff. sequencebreakpodcast.com. Trying some live streams Wednesdays when I'm available on twitch.tv/retrogaminglivetv. So if you'd like to see the live version of the podcast, twitch.tv/retrogaminglivetv. Hope to see you there, and I hope to see you in the next one.